Chapter 16. Something woke him much later. A crash loud enough to cause him to sit up in bed, wondering if Ellie had fallen onto the floor or if maybe Gage's crib had collapsed. Then the moon sailed out from behind a cloud, flooding the room with cold white light, and he saw Victor Pascal standing in the doorway. The crash had been Pascal throwing open the door. He stood there with his head bashed in behind the left temple. The blood had dried on his face in maroon stripes like Indian war paint. His collarbone jutted whitely. He was grinning. "Come on, doctor," Pascal said. "We got places to go." Louis looked around. His wife was a vague hump under her yellow comforter, sleeping deeply. He looked back at Pascal, who was dead but somehow not dead. Yet Louis felt no fear. He realized why almost at once. "It's a dream," he thought. And it was only in his relief that he realized he had been frightened after all. "The dead do not return. It is physiologically impossible. This young man is an autopsy drawer in Bangor with the pathologist's tattoo, a Y cut stitched back up on him. The pathologist probably tossed his brain into his chest cavity after taking a tissue sample and filled up the skull cavity with brown paper to prevent leaking. Simpler than trying to fit the brain back into the skull like a jigsaw puzzle piece into a puzzle." Uncle Carl, father of the unfortunate Ruthie, had told him that pathologists did that and all sorts of other random information that he supposed would give Rachel, with her death phobia, the screaming horrors. But Pascal was not here. No way, baby. Pascal was in a refrigerated locker with a tag around his toe. And he is most certainly not wearing those red jogger shorts in there. Yet, the compulsion to get up was strong. Pascal's eyes were upon him. He threw back the covers and swung his feet onto the floor. The hooked rug, a wedding present from Rachel's grandmother long ago, pressed cold nubbles into the balls of his feet. The dream had a remarkable reality. It was so real that he would not follow Pascal until Pascal had turned and begun to go back down the stairs. The compulsion to follow was strong, but he did not want to be touched, even in a dream, by a walking corpse. But he did follow. Pascal's jogging shorts glimmered. They crossed the living room, dining room, kitchen. Louis expected Pascal to turn the lock and then lift the latch on the door, which connected the kitchen to the shed where he garaged the station wagon and the Civic, but Pascal did no such thing. Instead of opening the door, he simply passed through. And Louis, watching, thought with mild amazement, "Is that how it's done? Remarkable. Anyone could do that." He tried it himself and was a little amused to meet only unyielding wood. Apparently, he was a hard-headed realist, even in his dreams. Louis twisted the knob on the Yale lock, lifted the latch, and let himself into the shed garage. Pascal was not there. Louis wondered briefly if Pascal had ceased to exist. Figures in dreams often did just that. So did locations. First, you were standing nude by a swimming pool with a raging hard-on, discussing the possibilities of wife swapping with, say, Roger and Missy Dandridge. Then you blinked, and you were climbing the side of a Hawaiian volcano. Maybe he had lost Pascal because this was the beginning of Act 2. But when Louis emerged from the garage, he saw him again, standing in the faint moonlight at the back of the lawn, at the head of the path. Now, fear came, entering softly, sifting through the hollow places of his body and filling them up with dirty smoke. He did not want to go up there. He halted. Pascal glanced back over his shoulder, and in the moonlight his eyes were silver. Louis felt a helpless crawl of horror in his belly. That jutting bone, those dried clots of blood. But it was hopeless to resist those eyes. This was apparently a dream about being hypnotized, being dominated, being unable to change things, perhaps the way he had been unable to change the fact of Pascal's death. He could go to school for 20 years and you still couldn't do a thing when they brought a guy in who had been rammed into a tree hard enough to open a window in his skull. They might as well have called a plumber, a rainmaker, or the man from 𝘰𝘕𝘦. And even as these thoughts passed through his mind, he was drawn forward onto the path. He followed the jogging shorts, as maroon in this light as the dried blood on Pascal's face. He didn't like this dream. Oh God, not at all. It was too real. The cold nubbles in the rug, the way he had not been able to pass through the shed door when a person could or should be able to walk through doors and walls in any self-respecting dream. And now the cool brush of dew on his bare feet and the feel of the night wind, just a breath of it, on his body, which was naked except for his jockey shorts. Once under the trees, pine needles stuck to the soles of his feet. Another little detail that was just a bit more real than it needed to be. Never mind. I am home in my own bed. It's just a dream. No matter how vivid, and like all other dreams, it will seem ridiculous in the morning. My waking mind will discover its inconsistencies. The small branch of a dead tree poked his bicep rudely, and he winced. Up ahead, Pascal was only a moving shadow, and now Louis's terror seemed to have crystallized into a bright sculpture in his mind. I am following a dead man in the woods. I am following a dead man up to the pet cemetery. And this is no dream. God help me, this is no dream. This is happening. They walked down the far side of the wooded hill. The path curved in the lazy S shapes between the trees and then plunged into the underbrush. No boots now. The ground dissolved into cold jelly under his feet, grabbing and holding, letting go only reluctantly. There were ugly, sucking noises. He could feel the mud oozing between his toes, trying to separate them. He tried desperately to hold on to the dream idea. It wouldn't wash. They reached the clearing, and the moon sailed free of its reef of clouds again, bathing the graveyard with ghastly effulgence. The leaning markers, bits of board and tin cans that had been cut with a father's tin snips and then hammered into rude squares, chipped chunks of shawl and slate, stood out with three-dimensional clarity, casting shadows perfectly black and defined. Pascal stopped near Smucky the cat. He was obedient, and turned back toward Louis. The horror, the terror, he felt these things would grow in him until his body blew apart under their soft yet implacable pressure. Pascal was grinning. His bloody lips were wrinkled back with his teeth, and his healthy, road-crude tan in the moon's bony light had become overlaid with the white of a corpse about to be sewn into its winding shroud. He lifted one arm and pointed. Louis looked in that direction and moaned. His eyes grew wide, and he crammed his knuckles against his mouth. There was a coolness in his cheek, and he realized that the extremity of his terror had begun to weep. The deadfall from which Judd Crandall had called Ellie in alarm had become a heap of bones. The bones were moving. They writhed and clicked together, mandibles and femurs and ulnas and molars and incisors. He saw the grinning skulls of humans and animals. Finger bones glittered. Here, the remains of a foot flexed its pallid joints. And it was moving. It was creeping. Pascal was walking toward him, his bloody face grim in the moonlight, and the last of Louis's coherent mind began to slip away in a yammering, cyclic thought. You got to scream yourself awake. Doesn't matter if you scare Rachel, Ellie, Gage awake. The whole household, the whole neighborhood got to scream yourself awake. Scream yourself awake, scream yourself awake, scream yourself awake. But only a thin whisper of air would come. It was the sound of a little kid sitting on a stoop somewhere and trying to teach himself to whistle. Pascal came closer and then spoke. The door must not be opened, Pascal said. He was looking down at Louis because Louis had fallen to his knees. There was a look on his face which Louis at first mistook for compassion. It wasn't really compassion at all, only a dreadful kind of patience. Still, he pointed at the moving pile of bones. "Don't go beyond, no matter how much you feel you need to, Doctor. The barrier was not made to be broken. Remember this. There is more power here than you know. It is old and always restless. Remember." Louis tried again to scream. He could not. "I come as a friend," Pascal said. But what was friend actually the word that Pascal used? Louis thought not. It was as if Pascal had spoken in a foreign language which Louis could understand through some dream magic. And friend was as close to whatever word Pascal had actually used that Louis' struggled mind could come. "Your destruction and the destruction of all you love is very near, Doctor." He was close enough for Louis to be able to smell death on him. Pascal reaching for him. The soft, maddening click of the bones. Louis began to overbalance in his effort to get away from the hand. His own hand struck a momentum and tilted it to the earth. Pascal's face, leaning down, filled with sky. "Doctor, remember." Louis tried to scream, and the world whirled away. But still, he heard the clicking of moving bones in the moonlit crypt of the night.